go ahead and move over to the wide receivers now. I'll start with my first guy. And I don't know if there's been a more unlucky wide receiver this year than George Pickens, because just looking at his numbers this year, he has been phenomenal. He has a 29% target share, 43.8% market share of the air yards. He's fourth in deep targets. He's fifth in red zone targets. He's fifth in first read target share among all wide receivers. 52 catches, 776 receiving yards. But he's only averaging 12.6 fantasy points per game because he only has 2 touchdowns. This man has had so many touchdowns, either called back from penalty. I think there's been at least 3 this year that he's had called back from penalty. He had another one that he was wide open that Russ threw it behind him that he couldn't get to. Like, his numbers could be well better than what they are right now, which is why he is 9th in expected fantasy points per game, because he is getting everything else. It's just he has been super unlucky and things have happened. So George Pickens, I think, is in a really good spot. He's also 8th in yards per route run, 5th in yards per team pass attempt. Since he versus wide receivers, they allow the 4th most fantasy points to outside wide receivers and the 11th most PPR points overall to wide receivers. So this is a really good matchup for George Pickens. I think eventually we're going to see one of these massive explosion spots come from him where he actually can connect on a touchdown, because he has been running really poorly in that department, and I think some regression is definitely heading his way.
For my first play at wide receiver this week, this one makes me extremely happy to be able to talk about, because it's been a guy of ours for quite some time. That's going to be Michael Pittman. It seems like Josh Downs is a long shot to play this weekend, which would be a big hit to the Colts in general, but it's certainly going to open up more targets for Michael Pittman, who has racked up 15 over the last 2 weeks. Now going to get a matchup against the Patriots defense that has struggled against outside wide receivers, specifically basically all season. Outside of last week, the Patriots offense has been able to at least keep up and push other teams, so I'd expect them to bounce back here in a favorable spot up against Indy, which should keep Richardson dropping back. And we did see last week with Pittman put up only his third wide receiver 2 week of the season, and he did lead the team with nearly 32% of the first read target share. So really like to see that. And obviously, like I said, with Josh Downs being out, that should open that up even further. And Pittman does move around a little bit as well. So that's something you do like to see. I'm curious to see what they're going to end up doing with Downs out and how much they move him into the slot. But I think he's been around like 25% throughout the season. But I think either way, Pittman's in a really nice spot here going up against the Pats.
It was good to finally see him kind of have sort of a breakout game this year, because he's been pretty bad so far this year for the most part. Some of it's injury related, some of it's just Anthony Richardson and just the quarterback play they've had this year. But that was pretty positive. I do agree. His numbers go up immensely once Josh Downs is off the field, so it should definitely help him quite a bit. So next up for me is going to be T. Higgins, and when I first looked this up a couple of weeks ago, I was shocked when I saw this, that the trend has continued so far through this point. But between him and Jamar Chase, he actually sees the highest target share whenever they're both on the field. He's actually first in first read target share as well. He's a 29% target share on the season. He's 16th in market share of air yards, averaging 18.5 fantasy points per game, which is top 10 among all wide receivers. He's 22nd in yards per route run, 9th in yards per team pass attempt, and has scored 15 or more PPR points in 4 straight games as well. So T. Higgins has been an absolute baller. This game also has a 47-point total, so there's a lot to like between both of these offenses for this week. Obviously, now this is the third player that I've talked about between running back and wide receivers from this game. But I just think this game sets up really nicely. We've gotten to the point where it is such a consolidated target share between him and Jamar Chase that these guys are eating up like 60% of the target share every single week. And so whenever it's like that, it makes it a lot easier to be able to target both of these guys and feel really good about playing them. And so T. Higgins, I just think for the rest of the season is a borderline top 12 wide receiver. I mean, that's what he has produced at all year. It's not just a really small sample size. I mean, we've seen enough now to see this is how this is going to go. And so I think T. Higgins is in a fantastic spot this week. It's not the best matchup against the Steelers. The Steelers do a better job, but they do allow the 15th most receiving yards to wide receivers. They've been a little bit more stingy in terms of allowing, touchdowns to wide receivers this year. But still, T. Higgins has just been an absolute baller. This offense has been so good. So really love T. Higgins as well.
Yeah, I mean, we just saw Jerry Jeudy torch, specifically Joey Porter Jr. in that game. So there's definitely going to be enough to go around for all these guys. You kind of wish that they would consolidate those tight end targets, just because tight end has been so bad. I feel like if we just got one tight end getting those targets, but they split that around between 3 or 4 different guys. So really the only ones you can trust when everyone's healthy is, obviously Chase, Higgins, and then Chase Brown. Speaking of someone who's also been balling out this year, let's go to Jaxon Smith-Njigba, who's just been on an absolute heater the past 3 weeks, putting up 3 straight wide receiver 1 performances. In his first 8 games of the year, JSN totaled 388 receiving yards, and he has nearly matched that in these past 3 weeks, going for 367. Now Seattle's going to get a matchup against the Jets. You were touching on this already with Kenneth Walker. That defense is not really a defense that we are shying away from like we have in the past few seasons. And regardless, JSN is basically staying in the slot for almost all of his snaps anyway. Seattle is actually a 2-point favorite here on the road right now. We also have a little bit of that Geno Smith revenge game narrative floating here too. So I love this spot for JSN. I think he continues the tear that he's on in week 13.
Yeah, it's been good to see him finally kind of break out this last half of the season. So, it really was kind of rough starting the season. It was once again looking at things like, man, okay, maybe it's not the offensive coordinator. Maybe it wasn't fraudulent. Maybe it really was, JSN. But we've seen a pretty big shift now within this offense. So that is a positive, a good sign for things to come as well. So I actually wouldn't be surprised if like JSN next year is like, going in like the 3rd round or something like that of drafts. Like I think he's going to be going much higher than what he is right now because I do expect Tyler Lockett to be gone. And I just think targets are going to be pretty consolidated like we've seen there, even with Tyler Lockett there. So like that call a lot. Next up for me is going to be Ladd McConkey going against the Falcons. On the season, Ladd McConkey seeing about a 25% target share. He plays 63% of the snaps from the slot. He's averaging just about 14 fantasy points per game. He's 21st in yards per route run, 16th in yards after the catch. What I really love to see as well is that right now, I mean, there's really not a whole lot else there, right? I mean, Quentin Johnson, a really frustrating game on Monday, targeted 5 times, had 3 drops. I mean, really should have scored a touchdown. They completely missed them. But I mean, right now, Ladd McConkey is the only wide receiver they have that has been consistent. Obviously, he's a rookie wide receiver, but he's played really well this year. And I don't think he's really gotten the roses that he deserves so far, as well as he's played. He has a shot. I think he probably will go over 1,000 receiving yards this year by the time it's all over. He's got 615 as of right now. With a little bit of time left, I think he can get close to that. And so, but overall, he gets a really, really good matchup this week against the Falcons. He's going to be seeing, because he plays so much from the slot, he's going to be seeing a lot of D. Alford, who's their primary slot for the Falcons. And he has been absolutely gashed all year. He's allowed 336 receiving yards, 3 touchdowns, and a 104.6 passer rating. And even beyond that, the Falcons have allowed the 7th most PPR points to wide receivers. And so I just think the target share continues to grow for Ladd McConkey just because he is clearly their number 1 wide receiver.
Yeah, and the other thing, too, to mention from that game is we had J.K. Dobbins leave with a knee injury. That could open up this offense even more with them not being able to lean on the run. Kamani Vidal, a lot of people were excited about. He was a sleeper for, a rookie sleeper for some folks. But as soon as Gus Edwards came back, he was a healthy and active. So, obviously they're going to have to bring him back in. But, that was something that I think that surprised a lot of people is we thought we were just going to get this like ground and pound, really slow, really conservative offense. And that just hasn't been the case with the Chargers, despite them not having a lot of weapons there to support Herbert outside of McConkey. So next up for me is going to be DJ Moore. I mentioned him last week as someone who was being ranked too low. Admittedly, I did say that I didn't feel confident like stamping it as one of my plays of the week. But he came through nonetheless. I think it was wide receiver 4 on the week last week. I'm going back to the well here again in week 13. I mentioned, giving thanks for Shane Waldron being fired. It just can't be understated just how fucking awful that it was. And, makes me sad we were robbed of these Caleb Williams performances for the first 10 weeks of the season. But the fact that they dealt with the Vikings defense the way they did makes me feel very good about this offense going forward. Minnesota did their thing, brought the blitz a ton against Williams like we knew they would. But Williams is actually only under pressure on 22% of his dropbacks this week. That was the 5th lowest mark without including the Monday night game. We know the Lions give it up through the air. They're allowing the 6th most fantasy points per game to wideouts. So I really like this spot for DJ Moore again. Also going to, go out on a limb and assume that we don't see 15 Keenan Allen targets, which could open it up for him. And I will say, we did see a massive bump for the DJ Moore ADOT. I talked about it last week at 0.9 for week 12. That went all the way up to a very, very hot 3.6 average depth of target, Kev. And still DJ Moore's out here doing his thing, 7 for 106 in a score, even with having a sub 5-yard ADOT.
Yeah, I love to see that. That was a good call by you last week. It was about time we were kind of waiting, and it's funny. All of a sudden, when he gets involved with the offense, that instead of sitting over moping on the sideline, he was over there joking around, having a good time. So, I guess he's back, being happy to be playing for the Chicago Bears again. So, yeah, I think there's, this offense has definitely looked remarkably better with Frazier gone. And I think this game could go a lot of different directions against the Lions. The Lions have kind of pimp slapped a lot of teams this year. But with this being a divisional game, I do think that this game could be a little bit closer. Maybe the Bears can kind of put on a little bit of a show here too, and this game could end up being really high scoring. So I do like that call. They're likely going to be playing, from behind, which is going to push them to throw the ball even more. So
just really quickly, we have a 10.5 point spread on this and a 48.5 point over under. So that spread, well, the Chiefs Raiders game that is sitting at 13. I'm assuming that's going to be the highest spread we have. And for the total, so 48.5 for the Rams and the Saints. It looks like, and then 54. Eagles Ravens. So yeah, that's going to be the tie for the second highest total we have of the week as well.
Yeah, which are all boxes you want to check. So for my last guy that I want to hit on, I'm going back to the it's going to be Brian Thomas Jr. versus the Texans. Now, listen, the first thing we want to mention is that Trevor Lawrence actually was at practice today. So that is a positive first practice off the bye week. So they're basically said that they're going to let him, practice this week, see how he does. If he responds well, then he's going to play this weekend because they need him because, the quarterback play they've had so far this year has been terrible outside of Trevor Lawrence. And I kind of talked about this yesterday on the waiver wire show that we did on Sunday night. And Trevor Lawrence was actually playing pretty good football. I know people aren't going to want to hear that. In terms of fantasy production-wise, he was actually playing pretty well over the last 4 or 5 weeks of the season. He was averaging over 20 fantasy points per game. So I think this is a much welcome boost for the pass catchers. And as we've talked about, this thing is going to get even more consolidated because not only is Christian Kirk out for the year, Gabe Davis got put on IR. And so now I think it really opens the door up for someone like Brian Thomas to see a massive target share. Yes, Evan Ingram is still there. Evan Ingram's still going to see targets, but Brian Thomas now should be the unquestioned number one wide receiver. I think this week off should also help him with the own injury that he was dealing with. But Brian Thomas has been really good this year from an efficiency standpoint. 16th in yards per route run, 19th in yards per team pass tip, 9th in separation score, 8th in fantasy points per route run. So he has been one of the best rookie wide receivers this year. And now he gets a really good matchup against the Houston Texans, who allow the 7th most fantasy points to wide receivers. They allow the 13th most receptions, the 8th most receiving yards, and the most receiving touchdowns to wide receivers this year. So I think Brian Robinson could have another big game like we've seen earlier in the season from him before the injury. So I think they get back on track this week with Brian Thomas. I think Brian Thomas can threaten for 20 fantasy points this week.
Yeah, as long as Trevor Lawrence is back, that it should be wheels up. Like you said, it's going to consolidate that target tree a lot more as well. It's basically going to be him and Evan Ingram. So that should be something exciting to watch. And if you are in Dynasty, and you mentioned this on just like the regular buy sell video we did, Kev, if you still have a trade deadline that's open up in your redraft leagues, there is definitely a window open for Brian Thomas Jr. And if you're in Dynasty leagues, I think there's a window there as well. For my last play, I'm going to talk about Khalil Shakir. This isn't necessarily like a nuclear smash spot for him because, he just doesn't have that high of a ceiling. But I more so just wanted to bring him up so people aren't overlooking Shakir this week. I think he's a perfectly good like wide receiver 3/flex play, depending on your league settings and what, the size of your league. The 49ers are another team that's kind of falling apart here, and specifically for Shakir, DeMondre Lenore has allowed the 7th most yards from the slot, which is where Shakir operates. He's just been the definition of steady Eddie out there. Over the last 4 weeks, has at least 6 catches for 50 yards in all of those. Racked up 38 targets over the last 4 weeks as well. Even with this wide receiver room getting healthier, Shakir should still be a key piece of the passing attack. like I said, probably doesn't have the highest ceiling. Maybe you don't need a play like Shakir this week, considering we have no bye weeks we have to worry about. But I still think that he is a viable play here, and someone I just want to mention because I think he's going to go overlooked in a week like this.